This is a great crowd for a Sunday, rainy Sunday afternoon. I always pray for rain when we have a lecture. My husband always accuses me of the only person that likes it to rain in Columbus. I like it just to rain a little bit, not to storm, because then you all stay home when it storms, but if it just rains, you all come out. I'm Nanette Macy Jones, the executive director of the museum, and I see lots and lots of familiar faces, and I want to thank you all for coming out for this great lecture on the Lod Mosaic. That's being done by Dr. Lightfoot from the Metropolitan. We're very honored to have him here this afternoon. I'm going to give you over to Carol Ginshaft in a minute to introduce our speaker. But first, I wanted to tell you two things. One, I want to tell you that this wonderful lecture is the annual Cunningham Lecture. The Cunningham Lecture is in honor of Dr. Charles Cunningham, who passed away in 1996 and who left a very substantial gift to the museum. Now, Dr. Cunningham, his name was Charles Cunningham, Dr. Cunningham is someone who, if you need to be reminded to be nice to every person that you meet because you have no idea what their connection with you will be in the future, this is such a study. Dr. Cunningham was not a trustee of the museum. He was not, a major donor on anybody's radar screen. He was a wonderful gentleman that came to lots of openings. He was a member of the museum, came to lots of openings at the museum, and he traveled with us. His big bond with us was that he traveled as part of our travel group, which is now called Art Escapes. And we were all just amazed and in awe of the wonderful gift that he left the museum at his death. So we named the Cunningham Lecture for him. And so every year we have the annual Cunningham Lecture, and this is the lecture to this year. The other group of people I want to thank is all the people that made it possible for the Lod Mosaic to visit Columbus. If you haven't heard me say this, it's on a wonderful world tour, I think a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, because once it returns to Israel, it is the centerpiece of a new museum, so it is very unlikely to travel again. It opened its world tour at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, hence our lecture. It then went to the San Francisco Museums of Art. It has gone to the Chicago Field Museum, then to Columbus, and on the other end, I think it's stopping in Pennsylvania, but then it's going on to the Louvre in Paris, so it's going to do Paris, Berlin, and London as it goes on its way back to Israel. So this really is an extraordinary tour to be on, and it took a lot of people to be able to bring this wonderful object to Columbus. First and foremost, I want to thank Jeannie and Jay Schottenstein and their family foundation who really made this possible. I also want to thank our friends at the Israeli Antiquities Authority who have helped us before and are very good friends of this institution. And in fact, we have a representative from the Antiquities Authority here today, Jacob Fish. For the ongoing work at the museum, I want to thank the Ohio Arts Council, the Greater Columbus Arts Council, the Columbus Foundation, and Nationwide Foundation, all of whom make our work possible day in and day out. And finally, I want to thank the people, the friends of the Lod Mosaic. A lot of people just stood up and helped out. Bringing wonderful objects to a museum is not an inexpensive proposition, and quite a number of people stood up and said, no, we'll throw some more money in the pot this year to make this possible. So I thank the friends of the Lod Mosaic who are all listed up with the exhibition. Now, today's lecture is not only the Cunningham Lecture, it is made possible to be free to all of us because of the Columbus Jewish Foundation sponsoring this lecture. So we thank them as well, because otherwise we would have to charge for lectures like this. So it's great that it's free. I want to now introduce our adjunct curator, Carol Ginshaft, who is going to introduce our guest for this afternoon, our speaker. And do we get to turn this off?
Good afternoon, everyone. Just a little housekeeping. Can everybody hear in the back? Good, because we've been working on that to get it just right. So I hope you can all hear very well. Again, I also thank the Charles Cunningham Lecture Series and the Columbus Jewish Foundation for their support. And I want to remind you that there's a reception afterwards in the forum, and we hope you all come and continue the conversation with Dr. Lightfoot. We'd love to see you there. And I would also ask that you turn off your cell phones. That would be great. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Christopher Lightfoot, who is a curator in the Department of Greek and Roman Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He specializes in numismatics, ancient glass, and Roman minor arts and directs the ongoing British excavations at Amorium in Turkey. Educated at the University of Oxford, he earned his doctoral degree in ancient history before joining the British Museum in 1982. After moving to the Met in 1999, he oversaw the day-to-day management of the reinstallation of the new Greek and Roman galleries that opened in April 2007. He also curated the exhibition of the Lod Mosaic at the Met, wrote about it, and I'm sure he'll share that with you. In addition to his numerous academic publications, Dr. Lightfoot has translated many Turkish books and articles into English, as well as regularly publishing and lecturing in Turkish himself. So it gives me great pleasure to bring Dr. Lightfoot to you now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here to talk to you about the now world-famous Lod Mosaic. But first, I'd like to offer my thanks to Carol Genshaft, who extended the invitation and then a warm welcome to Columbia, and also to Jacob Fish, Executive Director of the Israel Antiquities Authority, and, as it were, the road manager for the Lod Mosaic World Tour. Now, hopefully I'm going to do this correctly. Although Roman mosaics have been found throughout the Roman Empire, from Britain and Portugal in the west to Egypt and Mesopotamia in the east, only a few are to be found in permanent public collections in the I don't think we need that much light, thank you. Certainly not on me. To Egypt and Mesopotamia in the east, but only a few are to be found in permanent public collections in the United States. For example, my own department at the Metropolitan Museum has very few Roman mosaics in its own collection, and only one is presently on display, the one you see on the screen now. So this special exhibition has provided the American public with a wonderful opportunity to see a fine example of an art form that perhaps more than any other typifies that of the Romans. In September 2010, NBC in New York ran a feature on the Lod Mosaic for its local evening news program. The presenter introduced the mosaic by saying that it was a discovery, that its discovery was something that would have made Indiana Jones envious. This remark made me cringe inwardly, but it typifies the popular glamorous image of archaeology. The find, made back in 1996, was indeed exciting and spectacular, but the idea that it was made by treasure-seeking archaeologists resembling Harrison Ford is, of course, ridiculous. It was, in fact, found accidentally by construction workers who were widening a road or, according to a different Israeli source I read, digging a sewer. Not the stuff of Hollywood movies, I think. Anyway, the rescue excavation was immediately carried out by the Israel Antiquities Authority under the direction of archaeologist Miriam Avissar. The mosaic was found to comprise of several decorated panels in a floor that measured some 50 by 27 feet. So this was a very large space, and initially when I went to Lod with Jacob Fish, I was told, well, probably this was an outside unroofed area because it was so large. But I was doubtful about this at the time, and since people have changed their minds, partly because when they were cleaning and conserving it and preparing it for lifting, Jacques Naguère and the other mosaic conservators looked very closely at the surface and saw that it was in very, very good condition. There was very little weathering and damage to the mosaic, which indicated that it was in a a roofed building. But of course, it means that somehow the Romans had been able to span this large area without any roof supports intruding on the design of the mosaic. So what we had here was a very large room, and it's probably best to interpret it as some form of assembly hall or reception room. What is not clear, however, is whether this room and what has been excavated since were part of a public building or a private house. Whatever the case, the mosaic was presumably commissioned by a wealthy and important local figure in the Roman colony of Lod, which was also known in antiquity as Lydda or Dissopolis. That is the Greek meaning city of Zeus. And this Roman colony was founded either in the mid-2nd century AD, according to some ancient sources, or possibly by Septimius Severus in the early 3rd century AD. The city appears just below Jerusalem on the famous map mosaic from the Byzantine church at Madaba in Jordan, showing that it was a place of some significance in Roman Palestine right through until the Muslim conquest. That is from around 150 or 200 AD to 640 AD. And I hope you can see Lod up here and its name. Oh dear, my Greek has gone to pot. But it actually says Lod Ertoi Luder Erkai Dissopolis. That is, the name of the place, the city is Lod or Lydea or also Dissopolis. I apologize, it's changing from one computer to another. It hasn't kept the font. So little, however, was known of the Roman city of Lod in archaeological terms before this amazing discovery was made. So it's added a great deal of information about the prestige and wealth of the Roman colony there in later Roman times. The rescue excavations found little of the architecture of the building, but this is not surprising given that the mosaic was only some 3 feet below the modern ground surface. Fresco fragments found in the fill above the mosaic show that the walls were also finely decorated, but at some later date the walls themselves were robbed out and the stone probably reused for new construction. And as I explained to Carol last night over dinner, if you had a derelict, abandoned, ruined building, you would rob away the stone out of the walls and get down to the footings of those walls. And then if it had a mosaic floor, you would leave the mosaic floor because you couldn't possibly recycle a mosaic floor in any way. But the stone blocks, the masonry, you could carry that away and build something else with it. And that's why so many mosaics throughout the Roman world have survived, because they couldn't be recycled and it wasn't worth digging them up. So despite the almost complete destruction of the building, the floors themselves were preserved in a remarkable state. The best 3 panels were selected for removal and display in this special exhibition, which you can see upstairs. There is only one major area of damage, which only serves to highlight the fortuitous nature of the mosaic's survival. It is shown here on the marine, or what I like to call fish and ships panel, here. This photograph was taken when it was still in situ in the ground, and that is the the modern backfill that was put into the hole. But whether this damage was caused by a late Ottoman, that is late 19th century, pit, as first suggested, or by the deliberate defacing of the mosaic in Byzantine or early Islamic times, as proposed more recently by Miriam Avessar, remains unclear. There is, however, no evidence of earthquake damage on these floors. And this is an important point, really, when you're talking about the archaeology of Israel and surrounding areas, which are very active in seismic terms throughout late antiquity and the early Islamic periods. The panels are made up of small stone cubes known as tesserae in various colors, including bright reds and yellows. These are natural local stones. The colors green and blue, however, when required, have to be supplied by using glass instead of stone. The mosaic now on display here has in fact very little glass in it. If you look closely, you will see that only the peacock has an outline in turquoise blue glass tesserae, as you can see. And likewise, one of the fish on the large marine panel is marked out with a line of dark blue glass tesserae along the top of its back, along here. These are discernible partly because the glass is more worn than the stone tesserae, of course. In fact, this morning when I was having another good look at the mosaic, I also thought I noticed a few specks of light turquoise blue glass had been added to one of the large red mullet fish on the upper panel as well. The exhibit is accompanied by a video produced by the Metropolitan Museum from footage provided by the Israel Antiquities Authority, featuring not only Miriam Avessar, the archaeologist, but also Jacques Neguer, the conservator who lifted the mosaic and who also did the conservation work needed for the installation here. The installation work actually is very interesting because I observed it in New York. It takes them quite a lot of time to put the various little sections together and rebuild the whole floor. And we assumed that it would take them the same amount of time to take it apart. So we allocated the whole of one night for its disassembly. And Jacques and his assistant, Hulab, came in at 6 o'clock, and they basically just pulled the sections apart like this, and in half an hour it was all in pieces again. Anyway, the video describes both the discovery and the conservation of the mosaic in Israel. So I will not dwell on all this now. Instead, I want to focus on the iconography of the mosaic, which is itself very interesting. The Lod Mosaic depicts scenes from the animal kingdom with a variety of fish, birds, and beasts. But a common theme contained in them is that of hunting, of predators and prey. Many of these are typical scenes commonly found in Roman art in many different media. They may appear simply as innocent, charming vignettes, but in the context of the whole mosaic, a case can be made for seeing most, if not all, of them as related to the exploitation of the natural world and the ethos of the survival of the fittest, even among the animals themselves. So the fish are shown not only in a basket ready for market, but also swallowing each other, as on the large marine panel. As well as the fish, you should note in this panel, there's reference upstairs in the exhibit to murex shells. We have a couple of those depicted. And there are also these other ones here, which some people initially thought were fishing baskets or lobster baskets, nets of some sort. And I said, no, they must be scallop shells. And I'm sure that's right. So those are the fish. The animals, of course, are having a grand time, or at least the lions, tigers, and leopards are. Their prey, on the other hand, is being hauled to the ground with blood pouring out of their wounds. Again, these are common scenes found in ancient art and could be illustrated with numerous other examples, including minor works such as silverware, jewellery, and pottery. Here's just another example of a lion with a wild donkey, an onager, I think, on these, and similarly on the panel in the Lod Mosaic. Of course, here are some examples of minor arts from our collection. A fragment of Roman sigillata pottery, a very small gem with an intaglio, and this is the handle, a silver gilt handle of a large serving tray or fish dish. But as you can see, on many of these other works, the scenes show the animals being hunted by men. And as you will doubtless have noticed, one peculiar and distinguishing feature of the Lod Mosaic is that it contains no human figures whatsoever. There are no hunters, and likewise, there are no fishermen. Marine scenes were popular on Roman mosaics and often show real people or winged cupids fishing, but not here. The Lod Mosaic, however, does contain two splendid images of Roman merchant ships, although here again, these ships don't seem to be manned in any way. There's no visible crew members on board them. The two ships have attracted a lot of attention from what might be called underwater or nautical archaeologists and art historians because of their very detailed depiction of Roman trading ships. These are not triremes or warships, but cargo ships. And they show a very unique aspect of them is these pennants on the bows of the two ships. Almost all the other depictions in Roman art of Roman merchant ships show them with figureheads, figures of ducks' heads or goddesses, deities on them. But here, for some reason, they've been replaced with these pennants, whether they represent the shipping line flag, as it were, the owner's flag for these ships, or something of the sort. We're not quite sure. And it's very unfortunate that we do have this loss to the second ship. Again, it's not clear whether, with the other ship, you can see it has its sails billowing with the wind and seems to be under steam. But this other one, from the top of its mast, the mast is clearly at an acute angle. And there are two possible interpretations of that. One is that the ship has come to rest and has lowered its mast. And we know that some Roman ships did that rather than just lowering the sails. They'd lower the mast to enter river estuaries and go under bridges. Or the other interpretation, which I'll return to, is that it's a ship in distress and that the the mast has collapsed. And Miriam made a very good point. She noticed these two spikes here in the stern, and it may be that they are part of the rigging that has come undone, hence the collapse of the mast. So, because of these scenes, it has been suggested by one Israeli scholar that the ships, the inclusion of the ships, implies that the building and the mosaics belong to a rich local ship owner. This cannot be proved one way or the other, but is worth bearing in mind. And the ships may relate to another major feature of the Lod Mosaic, namely the main scene in the large central octagon. Here we see, as well as a tiger and pair of lions, animals that were truly exotic, rarely seen in daily life and equally rarely depicted in art, namely the elephant, the giraffe, and the rhinoceros. Such animals were caught and brought to Rome only for shows and hunting games in the arena. The giraffe, for example, was first seen in Rome during the triumphal games held by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. The giraffe, however, was not very suitable for the games since it was too docile, but it did have star appeal because of its unusual appearance. The Romans, in fact, did not know what to make of it and called it a camelopardalis, that is, a spotted camel. Like the Romans, other peoples were equally fascinated by the animals. When a specimen was presented in 1414 by the King of Bengal to the Ming Emperor of China, it clearly caused quite a stir, and hence these later depictions, as here, of a giraffe in China. The Chinese, in fact, equated the giraffe with an auspicious mythical creature that they called the qilin or quilin. In Europe, too, the giraffe has an interesting history in the post-Roman period. A giraffe was presented to Lorenzo de' Medici in 1486, causing a great stir when it arrived in Florence. It was probably the first living giraffe to be seen in Europe for over 1,000 years. The Adoration of the Magi by Domenico Ghirlandaio, part of a cycle in the Tornabuoni Chapel, was painted just after the arrival of the Medici Giraffe and shows the animal descending a hill on the right-hand side, up here. Sadly, shortly after its arrival, the giraffe broke its neck and died after its head became stuck in the beams of the stables that had been prepared for it. The giraffe was not seen again in Europe until 1826, when 3 specimens were dispatched by the Ottoman Viceroy of Egypt, Mehmet Ali Pasha, to Francis II, the Holy Roman Emperor in Vienna, King George IV in London, and to Charles X in Paris. The former 2 giraffes did not survive long, but the third, known as Zarafa, from the Arabic Zurafa, meaning giraffe, lived happily in Paris for 18 years. And I'd like to think that anyone could live happily in Paris for 18 years. The reason for the gifts would seem to have been to encourage these European kings and emperors to forego their support for the Greeks, then engaged in the War of Independence against the Ottomans. Sadly for the Ottomans, giraffe diplomacy failed, but it was a nice idea, perhaps one that we should return to. Let's instead return to the Lod Mosaic and to another of the exotic animals shown there, namely the rhinoceros. The earliest representation I have been able to find may be this bronze example from China that I was fortunate to see when I went to San Francisco for the Lod lecture there at the Legion, and I called in and had a marvelous morning at the Asian Art Museum, and I saw this bronze ritual vessel in the form of a rhinoceros. It can be identified as a Sumatran rhino because it has two horns, as you can see, which distinguishes it from the Indian rhino, which has only one. Both specimens of African rhino, the white and the black, also have two horns, which is a bit of a problem for us. Because most of the representations in Roman art, and there aren't very many of them, don't seem to represent two horns, but only one horn. But it's assumed, and I've assumed it, that the rhino that we see on the Lod Mosaic is an African rhino, not an Indian one. In the Roman world, in the classical world, the earliest depiction of the rhinoceros appears on the famous Nile mosaic that you can see here from the Sanctuary of Fortuna at Praeneste in Italy, which is dated to the late 2nd century BC. You see it's a big mosaic with this Nilotic scene, and we can tell this is supposed to be a rhinoceros because it tells us so in Greek underneath. It also, the rhinoceros also featured on another famous but much later mosaic in the Roman villa at Armarina in Sicily. In both cases, however, and again, this one is shown in a Nilotic scene. In both cases, this association with the Nile Valley is quite wrong for the animal, although it does indicate that the animal was obtained by the Romans through Egypt and probably shipped down the Nile. But of course, the rhino must have come from sub-Saharan Africa, the savanna lands of East Africa. The Emperor Augustus is reported to have exhibited a rhinoceros in the Campus Martius in Rome during his reign, that is between 27 BC and AD 14. But the first ones that seem to have taken part in the games in the arena were brought to Rome in AD 80 by the Emperor Titus to mark the opening of the Colosseum. And well, let's just go back to this one. We know this from references in a series of poems known as the De Spectaculis that were written by the contemporary Latin poet Martial, which celebrated the opening of the Colosseum. And it was also probably celebrated in a series of bronze coins that were minted at Rome by Titus's brother and successor, the Emperor Domitian. And I show you one example here at the top. And I also found a coin minted in Alexandria in Egypt from slightly later, from the reign of Trajan. So this seems to be the first occasion when the rhinoceros made its appearance in the arena in the animal hunting or animal fighting shows. If you don't want to read Martial, you may want to dip into this recent modern historical novel. I'm not giving a plug for it. I don't think it's a particularly good novel, but there is a section in it which describes these opening games at the Colosseum, which is taken very, very accurately, very closely from Martial's poems. And so you can get an impression of that event from reading this novel. But I put this slide on the screen because if you look closely, you can see that behind the coin of Hadrian here and behind all the blurb, you can make out the image of the Lod Mosaic. If we just run back to the main view of the mosaic, so I've covered at least these two animals here. I'm not going to say too much about elephants because elephants are known quite well throughout Roman art, and so is the tiger, although exactly where they were getting tigers from is a bit of a problem. But I want to just point out the bull here, the well-endowed bull. And when I first saw this, I thought, what is a bull doing here? It's a bit of a mystery. Well, the bull is mainly associated in Roman art, particularly in Roman funerary art, with lions. And I put two examples on the screen here. This one, of course, is part of the Lod Mosaic upstairs. But this is another very fine late Roman mosaic from Sepphoris in Israel that I saw at the beginning of the year. And I think you can see there's a lion attacking a bull down there. So lions and bulls, fine, but the bull in the Lod Mosaic isn't really associated with the lion and lioness, which were up on these tabletop mountains at the back. But the poems by Martial describe the appearance of the rhinoceros in the games in the Colosseum. And of course, the bull, before the appearance of the rhinoceros, was the archetypal animal that could toss you on its horns. So the clever old Romans, of course, decided to pit the best bull against a rhinoceros, and Martial describes this in the poems, and of course you don't get any prizes for guessing who is the hands down or the horns down winner in this competition. It was the rhinoceros, of course. So I'd like to think there's some sort of tenuous reference to this conflict, competition in the arena between a bull and a rhinoceros in the main panel of the Lod Mosaic. I've rather gone on about this to a lot, but before I leave the rhinoceros, I'd just like to say that we don't actually have to go as far as Italy to find other representations of the rhinoceros. There's this wonderful painted tomb at Marescia in, I'm not quite sure actually where it is in Israel, central Israel. And it has a frieze of various hunting scenes, including some huntsmen, and all sorts of different animals, including an elephant and a wild boar. But I picked out these here. Obviously, we've got a giraffe here, and of course a rhinoceros. And these are considerably earlier than the Lod Mosaic, dated to around the 3rd century BC, Hellenistic period. But there were clearly examples of these images around in Israel before the Lod Mosaic. Perhaps we can contrive a story about how the Lod Mosaic came to be assembled in the sense of its subject matter. It does suggest that the wealthy owner or the patron who paid for the Lod Mosaic made his money as a ship owner, transporting such valuable animals from Africa and elsewhere for the spectacular hunting shows that the Roman public enjoyed so much, along with gladiatorial games. The animals, birds, and fish, however, are not the only images and messages that the mosaic conveys to us, and presumably was meant to impart to those using the building in Roman times. For example, between the lion and lioness sitting on tabletop mountains at the back of the main scene is a stretch of water, indicated by this area of grey stone, tesserae. And on that expanse of water, we can see a mythical sea creature, which is called in Greek the ketose. This part of the mosaic has been interpreted as representing the mountains of Ethiopia and the headwaters of the River Nile. But I prefer to see it as representing the great ocean that the ancients thought encircled the world. The ketose is unexpected here amongst all the very real animals, but it is a creature commonly found in ancient art. The most famous example, perhaps, is the one on the cameo glass porcelain vase in the British Museum that you can see here in a detail over here. You see it has the same sort of shaggy dog-looking head. But we can find other examples in the collection of Roman art at the Metropolitan Museum, as well as the striking image of a ketose on one of the mythological panels among the frescoes from the Roman villa at Bosco Trecase. There is one on the Eros and Psyche marble sarcophagus that was located next to the Lod Mosaic, very conveniently for me when I was giving gallery talks, when the mosaic was displayed at the Met. Below the central medallion with the portrait bust of the deceased, there are two reclining figures. On one side we have Tellus, Mother Earth, with a goat, and on the other side we have Oceanus, the ocean or the sea, with a ketose at his feet. In fact, the creature is widely depicted in ancient art, with examples ranging from archaic Greece, as with this small fragment of a vase made in Crete or southern Italy that dates to the second half of the 7th century BC, to a small vase from Etruria, Etruscan vase, to that of the early Christian period, as with this table support, which actually shows Jonah being fed to a ketose-looking whale. At the front and on the main axis of the central panel of the Lod Mosaic, there is a scene with two female panthers clinging like large zoomorphic handles to the sides of a large vase. By chance, just one such vase survives from Petra in Jordan. Made of Phrygian marble, that is imported marble from Asia Minor, the Petra crater, or mixing bowl, was found in the mid-5th century church, but it is regarded by experts as a residual piece of what we call spolia, and is itself dated to around 200 AD. All the other large cats on the Lod Mosaic are doing things that came naturally to them, but these two panthers clearly are not. In Roman art, the panther was most frequently associated with Dionysus. Again, objects in the Metropolitan's permanent on-view collection can be called on to illustrate this. The most famous example is the so-called badminton sarcophagus, with Dionysus riding in triumph on the back of a panther, as you see here. Here are two other superb Roman sarcophagi, one in Boston, the other in Baltimore, that depict the triumph of Dionysus. In his procession, we can see as well as panthers, lions, elephants, and even giraffes. You can see the head of the giraffe up here. Note the dates given to these sarcophagi, that is around the late 2nd and early 3rd century. It should also be noted that the Boston example includes a detail that has direct bearing on the Lod Mosaic. For one of the satyrs is carrying a mixing bowl with panther handles. And I hope I'm going to show that. Yes, here we are. This motif would seem to originate not from the East, but from Rome itself, as we can see from these early marble and terracotta examples. Then only last Friday, I happened to go up to Columbia University in New York to a lecture by a friend of mine, a colleague from the Getty, Ken Lapperton. And in the course of his lecture, I came across another interesting motif on this silver cup, one of a pair of silver cups found at Bertheville in northern France in 1830. These are dated to around the 1st century AD, and what interested me here was the large mixing bowl, the crater here, and a panther coming out of it. Just as important as the panthers in Dionysiac scenes are the depictions of various mixing and drinking vessels, as shown on this mosaic from the Worcester Art Museum. And this theme is taken up on other parts of the Lod Mosaic that are not part of the present display. As you can see here, and this may be actually made out of glass or represents a glass vessel, and we have another large crater down there. It also appears on the Met sarcophagus that I have already shown you. Down here. This brings me back to the ketose on the mosaic and the large sea monster on the marine panel. I think Miriam Avissar was right in drawing attention to the tails of both creatures, but the latter is clearly not a ketose, but its sister, the whale, and in the Septuagint, the Greek word used for the whale that swallowed Jonah is indeed ketose. On the Lod Mosaic, however, the whale appears to be about to swallow the damaged ship to its left, as I've already mentioned. In addition to the mythological ketose of the classical world and the real whale, which, though not a native of the Mediterranean Sea, did sometimes wash up on its shores to the consternation and amazement of the locals, one must not forget also the Jewish Leviathan. Interestingly, a ketose-like monster is depicted on the base of the menorah, shown in the parade of spoils from the capture of Jerusalem in 70 AD by none other than the future Emperor Titus. So what does all this mean? Well, I'm afraid it's hard to tell. In one respect, the Lod Mosaic clearly carries some reference to the world of Dionysiac beliefs and to the prosperity and well-being that it engendered. On the other hand, the exotic animals may point to some interest, business or personal, in the trade and transportation of such animals for public games at Rome. However, other elements have been used to argue for Jewish or early Christian symbolism, and therefore for Jewish or Christian ownership. For example, the appearance of fish and the peacock are taken as early Christian evidence for Christian influence. I'm not so convinced by either the Jewish or the Christian aspects of the Lod Mosaic, although the lack of human representations does suggest some sort of Orthodox Jewish influence. But the peacock and fish, they're clearly just regular imagery used in Roman art, and as they were so standard, they became part of the corpus of Christian symbolism when Christianity really took hold. But there are clearly some cross-cultural aspects to the Lod Mosaic. I hope this brief survey has amply demonstrated to you that the vivid imagery on the Lod Mosaic is very much part of the mainstream of Roman art. The patron who commissioned the mosaic had clearly bought in to the traditions and lifestyle that the Roman Empire had spread across the Mediterranean world, including North Africa and much of Europe. It is not surprising, therefore, that some Israeli experts have detected similarities to, and perhaps even influences from, Roman mosaics found in North Africa, especially those to be found in modern Tunisia. But we have also seen similarities to mosaics and wall paintings from other parts of the Roman world. The very Roman nature of the various motifs that adorn the mosaic is also well illustrated by parallels found on terracotta oil lamps. These ubiquitous and utilitarian objects were mass-produced in reusable molds and often had figures and other designs on the central discs. So I hope you can make out here that we have a scallop shell here, dolphins here, hare with grapes here, a lion and some form of deer, I think, on that one, and even here a large mixing crater bowl with animal handles. And I decided to go through some of the Roman lamps in our collection too. We have about 450 Roman lamps, not all of them on display, sadly, that all come from Cyprus, part of the Cesnola collection. And as you can see, we have a bird on a twig, another scallop shell here, another hare. I can't see what's on that one over there, a lion, lioness here. But we also had this one. I turned up this example, which was really exciting for me, and I'll show you the details, because this is the only known example I know of this particular design on a Roman terracotta oil lamp. And as you can see, it's clearly a rhinoceros, and it seems to be tossing some, possibly a large cat, a lioness, on its horn. There's a tree behind, and there's a little animal up in the tree hiding. Now, it's beyond belief that a baby rhino would climb a tree to escape from the lion, but there's a certain amount of artistic license, I think, here. So anyway, my point is that these sorts of motifs were very, very common in the Roman repertoire. While such motifs appear on objects as cheap and mundane as mold-made lamps, they also feature in much grander and much more luxurious works, such as these high-class frescoes, or indeed, as we have seen, on the Lod Mosaic. So we go back to the peacock, which, as the information provided upstairs says, is not a native to the Mediterranean world. In fact, it comes from India. It was brought to the ancient Mediterranean world probably in Hellenistic times, but the Romans really took to the bird as an ornamental feature of their gardens and such like, and so started breeding peacocks for themselves. And so we have here examples of peacocks on these very fine early Roman frescoes, this one from Oplontis and the one in the Met. This variety of media of differing quality and value demonstrates that there was a repertoire of popular subjects that was shared throughout the empire and by almost every level of society. The fortuitous survival of the Lod Mosaic, its careful excavation and skillful conservation, and its present display here at the Columbus Museum of Art provide a new insight into the pervasiveness as well as the lasting appeal of Roman art. Thank you very much, and if there are any questions, I will try to answer them. I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you again. Yes, Carol.
Do you find it at all unusual, there's, the mosaic is in 3 distinct sections. Is that typical, the fact that, there's the upper panel, the lower, and the middle? Relate directly?
No, it is a little unusual, and particularly the large marine panel, because as you saw, some of the other panels are in the same sort of little segments with the guilloche designs around them. But clearly, I think it was intended that that marine panel was on the main axis. You clearly came into that room with that facing you, and they really wanted to make an impact with that scene there before you moved on. And as you pointed out in the information panels upstairs, one great thing about a mosaic is it's on the floor and you can look at it from any direction you like. You can wander around, so that's why some of the scenes are upside down, as it would appear to us vertically. Yes? No? No? Anyone? Yes?
Both of the ships have little birds sitting on the back.
No, that's part of the stern decoration of ducks' heads. They should have another one at the front, as I said, a figurehead, but they don't have. They have square pennants instead. Yes?
Are the fish identifiable as certain types of fish?
We attempted to do that at the Met, and with help from a lady at the Smithsonian in Washington. And I think on the Lod Mosaic website down here, there is a whole catalogue of the different fish, and some of them are identified upstairs on the labelling too. But I'm not a fish expert. I prefer rhinoceroses and giraffes. I just eat them. Yes?
I wonder what sort of a base they had that made it stay so. I mean, we use concrete or something now.
Uh-huh.
They use. And could that be dug up with the mosaic to keep it all together?
That is to a large extent explained, I think, in the video. There were various layers of foundation you had to put down, and the fact that this one survived so well indicates that they spent a lot of time and trouble making those foundations really solid, so there was no movement, no subsidence, not even in an earthquake to it. But you went up by gradations from big rubble at the bottom to a thin layer of lime mortar at the top, which you laid your tessera into. So because they were laid in strata, it was easy for the conservators to lift it, because they just had to prise the very top layer off. They didn't have to hack through this whole floor. But it does mean, you have to think as well, not just about why this mosaic was laid and who did it and what all the imagery meant, but the amount of time and money that it consumed. You couldn't say, yes, I want a new mosaic in my villa or my public building, and have a mosaic today come and lay you a new mosaic overnight. It took possibly 6 months to a year or more to lay one of these mosaics. So there was a lot of disruption, and of course it meant it cost a lot of money. The good thing is that once you'd laid it, it was there for life.